Rain crashed against the shattered glass dome above, drumming over the ruins of what used to be a proud city. Beneath the rubble, deep under a collapsed old metro station, there was still warmth. A generator hummed faintly, unnoticed by anyone. On the surface, its hidden light reached only so far, flickering across metal walls and cracked panels, revealing a place that had once been a human emergency shelter. No one had stepped inside for years. At least, no human had. She was small for her kind, slender and half-starved, her silver eyes dull with exhaustion. Her skin shimmered faintly, a soft blue glow fading from malnutrition. For days she had not eaten anything that could truly sustain her. But she had something more important than food. She had shelter, a rare thing now. She had found it by mistake, crawling through a broken service tunnel while running from the battle above. When she fell into the shelter, bruised and cold, she thought she had finally found a tomb. But the warmth told her otherwise. It was not a tomb. It was a live dot at first. She thought it belonged to the dead. After all, the war had ended badly for both sides. Her people's ships burned in the skies before the humans' final weapon fell, cracking the ground and ending everything. No one expected survivors. The fact that she lived was already a miracle, but the shelter had power. It had food packets, clean water, and recycled air. All of it too well preserved to be abandoned. Someone had built this to last. She stayed low, afraid of activating anything that would alert sensors. She had learned the hard way that some shelters had defense systems, others had traps, but this one seemed empty. And it felt safe, so she slept, she ate. She breathed and waited for the next disaster. But then something changed. A sound echoed. Down the shaft, the sound of footsteps. She froze. No creature in the wasteland made that steady rhythm. Not the wandering drones that scavenged for parts, not the mutated beasts that now crawled in ruined streets. No, this was something else. Something terrifyingly familiar. She ran silently to the back wall, crawling through the vent she had pried open days ago. It was small but deep, and from inside, she could see part of the main room through the grate. She curled up, her body trembling. She pressed her lips together to hold in her breath. The heavy metal door hissed. Dust shook loose from the ceiling. Then a tall figure stepped in. Not armored like the soldiers she remembered. This one wore a heavy coat, soaked with rain. His boots were worn. His face looked tired but sharp, with a scar across one cheek. He carried no weapon in his hands, only a small device that blinked green. He moved like he had done this before. He walked straight to the generator panel, tapped a few buttons, and the lights stabilized. His sigh filled the room. "Still running," he muttered, almost to himself. She didn't understand every word, but she knew the tone. This shelter belonged to him. Her stomach tightened. If he found her, what would he do? Her kind were blamed for starting the war, for breaking the truce. Even if she hadn't fought, even if she was just a trainee when the bombs fell, it didn't matter now. She was the enemy. And humans didn't forget. He took off his coat and shook out the water. Then he sat at the edge of the sleeping bench, leaned forward, and stared at the far wall in silence. Minutes passed. He didn't eat, he didn't sleep. He just sat, lost in his own quiet. She watched him for hours. Night turned to gray morning. Above, the storm outside faded to drizzle, but the shelter stayed quiet. He eventually stood up and began checking the supplies. He opened a locker and paused. Her empty food packet was there. His fingers brushed across it. His body stiffened. He turned slowly, eyes scanning the room. Someone had been here. Maybe. Was still here. She pulled back, heart pounding. She tried to move deeper into the vent, but it creaked. Just once. A tiny sound. But enough. His head turned toward the noise. He stood. Moved closer. Step by step. She felt her body press tighter against the cold pipe, wishing to disappear. She didn't breathe. Her skin glowed slightly, uncontrollably, as fear rose inside her. His hand reached the vent opening. He stared at it. Nothing moved. Then he turned away. "Whoever you are," he said quietly, not even looking at the vent, "you've eaten my food. You're still breathing. That means you're not dead." She flinched. Her name, her voice, everything. Inside her screamed to remain hidden. He walked away, sat back on the bench and added, "Just don't make me regret not dragging you out." Then silence. She didn't know if he was bluffing or if he really didn't care. But she stayed hidden. Body shaking, heart racing. Somewhere in her a strange feeling stirred. She wasn't alone anymore. The shelter remained still. The man didn't search the vent again. Instead, he began to fix the systems one by one. He worked in silence, sometimes humming softly, sometimes muttering to himself. His hands moved with purpose, like he had done all this many times before. The alien girl stayed hidden, barely blinking. She watched everything. He was not like the others she had seen during the war. His face looked weathered but calm. He didn't seem angry. He didn't shout. He didn't even show fear. He looked like someone who had lost too much to care what species you were. And yet, she didn't dare show herself. The next day, he opened another storage box. He pulled out a bag of nutrient bars, tore one open, and bit it slowly. Then he paused. He looked at the vent again. He took another bar from the bag. Without saying a word, he walked over to the vent and placed the bar on the floor just beneath the grate. He didn't peek in. He didn't speak. He just set it down and walked away. She didn't move, not at first. She waited until he went to sleep. He lay on the bench, one arm under his head, a small light glowing next to him. His chest rose and fell in a steady rhythm. She crept forward. Her fingers trembled as she reached through the bars and pulled the food toward her. Her hands were thin and cold. She smelled the packet, no poison. Carefully, slowly, she ate. Each bite was a treasure. Her body soaked in the nutrients like dry soil drinking rain. After that, something began to shift. The man started leaving small things, more food, water, even a thin blanket. He never said anything. He never demanded anything. He just left them and walked away. She took them only when he wasn't looking. For days they lived in this quiet rhythm. Two strangers under the same roof, not speaking, not fighting, just surviving. Then came the cough. It started small, just a dry sound from deep in her chest. She tried to hide it, pressing her hands over her mouth, but the shelter was quiet. He heard it. He sat up quickly, listening. Then, slowly, he stood. He didn't speak. He just went to the cabinet, pulled out a bottle, and placed it near the vent. It was medicine, human medicine. Not made for her kind. But it was all there was. She stared at it for hours before reaching for it. The next day, her cough was worse. The damp air and lack of sunlight were taking a toll. She was weaker, shivering under the vent's thin metal floor. Then he did something unexpected. He spoke. "You're going to die in there," he said flatly. "You don't trust me, I get it. But I'm not the one who started that war. You want to stay hidden? Fine. But don't die in a vent like a rat." He stood near the grate, arms crossed, waiting. No movement. No sound. Then he turned and walked away. That night, the shelter lights flickered. A signal buzzed on the emergency coms. He rushed to the console, adjusted some dials, and listened. A human voice came through, distorted and broken. But clear enough. Sector 9 confirmed. Scan detected movement. Shelter signature pinged. Units mobilizing. His face changed. Serious. Cold. Damn. He muttered. She didn't know what the words meant, but she felt a danger. He packed quickly. Food, tools, fuel cells, everything that could be carried. He didn't leave anything behind. Then he looked at the vent again. "I'm leaving in 6 hours," he said. "After that, they'll find this place. If you want to live, come out." He didn't say more. She didn't move. She wanted to. Her body screamed to follow him, to believe him. But she couldn't forget the screams of her people, the fires in the sky, the hatred in the humans' eyes. Could she trust one man? The clock ticked. The hum of the shelter sounded louder than usual. She pulled her knees to her chest and buried her face, trying to stay silent, trying not to cry. Then the ground rumbled, a soft, distant shake, machines in motion. Maybe drones. Maybe worse. She opened her eyes. She listened. Footsteps. Again, but not his. Heavy. Cold, mechanical. She crawled forward, just enough to see. The door had opened. He stood facing it, weapon now in his hand. His shoulders were square, his face locked. In quiet rage, outside, a patrol hovered. He had stayed too long. She held her breath. Then the man said loud and clear, "No one's here but me." She stared, confused. Why lie? The drone scanned the shelter. She saw the red beam slicing through the room. One passed close to the vent. She didn't move. Seconds passed like hours. The drones finally pulled back. The door hissed shut again. Man exhaled. He sat down slowly, face pale. She stared at him. For the first time since the war began, she whispered a word from her language. A soft one. Not loud enough for him to hear, but it meant thank you. The air was still heavy from the tension that had just passed. The man sat near the door, motionless, his head tilted back, eyes closed. His weapon rested beside him, but his fingers stayed wrapped tightly around it. The drone patrol had left, but he knew they would return. And this time, they might not leave without digging deeper. She remained inside the vent, though her body had begun to ache. Her chest burned from holding back coughs, her limbs stiff from the cold metal she laid on. She was no longer sure what frightened her more, being found by patrols or being alone. Later, when the shelter lights dimmed for rest mode, the man stood. He didn't look toward her hiding place this time. He just moved toward the generator again, pressing a few buttons, adjusting the power levels. He moved with a strange calm, as if danger didn't shake him anymore. Then he pulled out a small metal cube from his coat and placed it in the middle of the room. He sat across from it, cross-legged, and tapped it. A soft glow came from the top. She watched in silence, unsure what the object was. A voice began to speak from the cube. A woman's voice, soft, warm, human. "If you're hearing this, it means you found Shelter 34. That means you're still alive, and that gives me hope." The man didn't move. His eyes stared blankly at the wall, not even focusing on the projection. "This shelter was built for families," the voice continued. "For survivors, not soldiers. If you're there, please protect it. Please use it. Please stay human." The voice faded. The man tapped the cube again, and the light disappeared. He sat in silence for a long time before finally standing. His movements looked heavier now, like a weight had returned to his shoulders. He placed the cube back in his coat and walked to the storage again. This time, he didn't leave food near the vent. He placed it on the table in the open, as if saying he no longer cared if she came for it or not. The next morning, he was gone. She waited in the vent, unsure if it was a trick. Minutes passed, then hours, still no sound. She crawled forward and peeked. The shelter was empty. She stepped out. Her bare feet touched the cold floor. The room felt larger now, lonelier. The food packet on the table sat untouched. She reached for it, took it, and sat near the warm pipe to eat. Her body still trembled. But it wasn't just from cold anymore. It was confusion, fear, wonder. Why had he not forced her out? She wandered through the shelter slowly, looking at things she had avoided before. The gear he used. The tools. The strange cube. She didn't touch anything else. She just sat where he had sat and looked at the things he had left behind. The hours stretched until the door hissed again. She panicked, sliding behind a storage crate, breathing fast. But it was him. He entered quietly, carrying a small bag slung over his shoulder. His coat was wet again. His boots covered in dirt and ash. He looked tired more than before. Without speaking, he walked past the bench and placed a box on the table. Then he saw the missing food packet. He paused. Their eyes met. For the first time, he didn't speak. Neither did she. He slowly reached into the box and pulled out a sealed container. He opened it and slid it gently across the table toward her. Inside were soft fruits. Preserved, clean. He sat down on the bench and looked away, as if giving her space to decide. Her feet moved without her meaning to. She walked forward, slowly, each step unsure. She sat across from him, not too close. Her fingers reached for a piece of fruit. She brought it to her mouth and took a small bite. It tasted like something from another life. He looked at her then. "I'm not your enemy," he said. His voice was quiet but firm. "I didn't fight your kind. I just lived through what they left behind." She stared at him, not understanding every word, but feeling the meaning. "You're not safe here," he continued. "That patrol wasn't random. They'll come back, stronger. This shelter was my father's. He built it to last, but not to fight." She looked at the door. "Out there is worse," he said. "But I know places, other shelters, deep ones. No one knows." He leaned forward. "I won't force you. But if you want to live, we can't stay." She looked down at the fruit in her hands. "I don't even know your name," he said softly. She looked up. Her voice cracked from disuse. "Siren," she whispered. He nodded. "Call me Ray." A strange quiet settled between them, not hostile, not awkward. Just new. She didn't fully trust him. But for the first time since the war, she didn't feel hunted. She felt noticed, heard, and maybe, just maybe, safe. Asterisk the next morning. The shelter no longer felt like a hiding place. It felt like a space between two worlds, hers and his. Siren sat quietly at the table, her thin fingers holding a water pouch as she watched Ray check over the equipment. He didn't rush. He moved like a man who had learned patience through pain. Siren had never sat this close to a human before. Not during peace, not during war. Her people had trained her to avoid humans, to treat them like fire-powerful, dangerous, impossible to touch without getting burned. But Ray had not burned her. Not yet. He handed her a folded gray cloth. "Wear this," he said. She took it, confused. "It's an old thermal cloak. It'll hide your glow." She looked down at her skin. Though it had faded, faint pulses of soft light still moved beneath her surface. The mark of her species. Beautiful to some, dangerous to others. She wrapped a cloth around herself. It was warm. Too warm. She didn't speak, but Ray gave a short nod of approval. Then he checked the generator one last time. He pressed a button on the wall and a small screen lit up an old map, cracked and faded. It showed a network of tunnels beneath the city. Most crossed out in red. "Here," Ray pointed. "There's another shelter 3 days south. My father called it Site 12. Buried under the ridge. No one's used it in years. That's where we're going." Siren tilted her head. "Why not stay here?" Ray's eyes were serious. "They'll come back. I gave them a fake story. But they'll scan deeper next time. And I don't want to shoot my way out," she understood. He packed only what they needed: food, batteries, tools, the message cube, and one small energy weapon. He gave her a tiny flashlight and showed her how to use it. She had never held human tech before. It felt strange in her hands, light but solid. When they opened the shelter door, cold wind poured in, sharp and dry. The surface looked like a graveyard. Broken towers, burnt metal, empty skies, no birds, no machines in sight. They walked quietly, keeping close to shadows. Ray moved with practiced care. Siren followed with light steps, her cloak wrapped tight. She watched everything her training returning with each cautious glance. That first night, they slept inside a fallen transport shell. Ray set up a heat stone, small and faint. He didn't talk much. He sat with his back to the wall, weapon near his side. Siren didn't sleep at first. She stared at the sky, remembering how it once had stars. Now it looked cracked and empty. "Where were you when it started?" she asked. Ray blinked. Her voice was still soft, but it surprised him. "Out there," he said, pointing toward the hills, "scavenging. Trying to stay out of it." She tilted her head. "But you fought?" He nodded. "I had to." She didn't ask more. In the silence, her eyes searched his face. She saw no pride, no fire. Only a tired man who had carried too much for too long. "I was a student," she whispered, "when the sky burned." Ray looked at her, really looked. "Then we both lost something." In the morning they traveled again. The path was longer than expected. Part of the route had collapsed, forcing them to go through a dark drainage tunnel. The air was thick and wet. At one point, they heard metal clanging behind them too far to see what it was. But both moved faster after that. On the second night, they rested under a half-buried satellite dish. Ray patched up a cut on her leg from broken rubble. She hissed in pain, but let him work. "You're lucky it didn't go deeper," he said. She watched his hands, how careful they were. Human fingers, steady, warm. She whispered, "You could have left me." He didn't look up. "I've left enough things behind," she said no more. By the third day, they reached the ridge. The land dipped into a wide trench, and there at the base was the entrance to Site 12. It was almost covered in rock, hidden from plain view. Ray cleared the dirt away with quiet effort. Then he placed his hand on the scanner. "It didn't light up. It's dead," he muttered. "Power's gone." Siren stepped forward. "May I try?" He nodded and stepped aside. She pressed her fingers to the panel. Her skin lit faintly as energy flowed. The door buzzed. It opened. Ray stared. Siren gave a weak smile. "Some systems still answer my kind." Inside, the shelter was dark, but dry. Ray found the backup cells and brought light. The place was small but strong, built for long survival. As the lights flickered on, Siren stepped in slowly. Her feet stopped. There were marks on the wall claw-like. Old but clear, signs of something that had once broken in. Ray saw it too. "This place may not be as empty as we hoped." Siren turned, her voice steady. "Then we survive again." The air inside the shelter was dry and heavy with dust. The old metal walls were scratched, not from age, but from something with claws. The lights flickered faintly above as Ray walked further in, holding his weapon ready. Siren stayed close. Behind him, her eyes scanning every corner, every crack. They passed an old storage unit, its door hanging loose. Inside were broken containers, some torn open from the inside. Ray knelt down and ran his fingers over the metal-deep gouges, sharp and uneven. "These weren't made by tools," he said quietly. "Whatever was here, it wasn't friendly." Siren looked around, her hand gripping the edge of her cloak tightly. The shelter wasn't as silent as the first one. There was a sound barely there, a distant tap, like something shifting in the dark halls. Ray moved slowly, flashlight in one hand, weapon in the other. "Stay close," he whispered. They explored the first chamber, mostly intact. The control Systems were off, but the panel still responded to light contact. Siren moved to one and pressed her palm against it. The screen glowed weakly. Foreign text filled the display. She read silently, translating for Ray. "There was a breach 2 years ago," she said. "A creature, it wasn't native. Something that got in from the surface. They locked it in the far corridor and sealed it." Ray frowned. "And did it die?" The screen flickered. Then the last line of text came up. "Unknown," Siren whispered. They both turned toward the deeper part of the shelter. It was dark beyond the hallway. The light stopped halfway down, leaving the far end buried in shadows. Ray sighed. "We need power online. We won't last here long without it." They moved back to the generator room. It was half buried under collapsed debris. Ray cleared it while Siren searched the back panels. He handed her a tool, and she connected a cable from her wrist light to the control port. Sparks flicked. Then a dull hum. The light stabilized. Fans started to turn. The shelter sighed back to life, but something else woke up with it. A sound, like something metal, scraping across the floor. Slow, steady. Then silence. Ray stood quickly, weapon raised. "Something's moving," he said. Siren froze. "The door to the sealed corridor. I think the power unlocked it." Ray didn't speak. He moved back to the hallway, keeping his eyes ahead. They heard another sound, low breathing, rough, not quite mechanical. Not quite alive either. Ray motioned her to stay back. Siren didn't obey. She followed, her body low, her cloak pulled tight. Her eyes glowed softly as she peered into the dark. Then they saw it. A shape moved beyond the broken bulkhead. Large, heavy, bent low like a beast, but with too many joints. Its limbs dragged something behind it, a tail or cables. They couldn't tell. It hadn't seen them yet. Ray whispered, "Back, slowly." Siren stepped once, twice, then a sharp piece of metal under her boot snapped. The creature stopped, its head turned. Two bright yellow eyes lit up, staring directly at them. Then it screamed, not a voice. A shriek like metal tearing through metal. It lunged forward. Ray fired. Blue sparks exploded from its side, but it didn't stop. It slammed into a wall, rebounded, and rushed again. Ray shouted, "Run!" They dashed through the corridor, Ray firing behind them. Siren ran faster than she thought possible. The shelter shook from the creature's steps. It crashed through a corner, sending pieces of wall flying. Ray reached the emergency bulkhead and slammed the panel. It didn't close. Manual. He shouted. Siren slid across the floor, found the override lever, and pulled. The door slammed down just as the creature lunged. Its claws smashed against the metal, but didn't break through. For now they stood there, breathing hard, backs against the wall. Ray looked at her. "Still want to survive again?" Siren gave a weak smile, chest rising and falling. "More than ever." They moved quickly, sealing off the damaged parts of the shelter. Ray rewired the door panel, locking it down with an emergency lockout. Siren ran checks on the system, translating fast, her fingers moving faster than she thought she could. They didn't sleep that night. The creature slammed against the door twice. Then it stopped, silent. They waited. Eventually, Ray leaned back and looked at her. "We stay here too long, we're dead," he said. "That thing's not going to forget." Siren nodded. "There's a maintenance shaft. Narrow, but it leads outside, past the hills." He stood. "Then we leave at first light." She hesitated. "Ray, if that thing follows..." He looked at the door. "Then I'll make sure it doesn't." She saw something in his eyes, not fear, but resolve. Pain wrapped in duty. He didn't say he would survive, and that was what scared her most. The night stretched long and tense. The sounds of the creature's scratching and growling faded, but neither Ray nor Siren dared to relax. They sat in the dim emergency lights, the metallic smell of fear still thick in the air. The hum of the shelter's now functional systems filled the quiet, but it only heightened the sense of waiting. Ray paced, checking the security locks one more time. His eyes flickered to the control panel, still displaying faint damage from the earlier attacks. He ran his fingers through his hair, staring at the blinking indicators. We need to get out before it finds another way in. Siren remained sitting, her back against the wall, the weight of her thoughts heavy on her shoulders. She knew that staying here was no longer an option, but she had questions, more than she wanted to admit. Ray, she asked quietly, her voice breaking the silence. What happens after we leave? Ray looked up, eyes filled with exhaustion and resolve. We find another shelter. If we can get past the hills, there's a hidden network that hasn't been touched. At least that's the hope. But after that? Siren pressed. Where will we go? Ray's jaw tightened. I'm not sure, he admitted, his voice low. I don't know where to go anymore. I just keep moving. Her heart clenched. She had expected answers, a plan. But in his eyes, she saw the same uncertainty she felt in her own chest. The silence between them was broken by a sharp echoing noise. The creature was back. It was scraping at the bulkhead door with renewed fury. Each strike was louder, stronger. It wasn't giving up. Siren's instincts screamed at her to move, to flee. But her feet felt rooted to the floor. Ray stood abruptly. He grabbed his weapon and nodded toward the tunnel's maintenance shaft. Get ready to move. We go now, or we don't go at all. Siren didn't need any further prompting. She rose to her feet, grabbing her pack, her pulse quickening. The only light now came from the faint emergency glow above. The power in the shelter was fading, but the map in the control room still showed a route to the maintenance shaft. It was narrow, tight, more like a crawl space than a passage. But it was their best chance. Ray moved quickly, checking the tunnel map once more before turning to her. We stay close. If the creature is still alive, it won't be able to follow us down there. We can use the access point to get out and head for the ridge. Siren nodded silently, too focused to speak. The pounding at the door was growing louder. Closer. She could hear the creature's low, guttural growls as it tried to tear through the steel barrier. The bulkhead's resistance wouldn't last much longer. They reached the narrow maintenance shaft. Ray was first, squeezing his body through the tight opening. His shoulders scraped against the metal as he advanced, his footsteps echoing softly. In the hollow space, Siren followed closely behind, her body hunched over, her breath shallow in the confined space. Her skin still pulsed faintly with light, but the cloak helped keep her glow hidden, blending her into the shadows. The sounds from behind them were distorted now, but the faint scraping noises still haunted her thoughts. They moved quickly, pushing. Through the dark, their only guide the flickering light from Ray's flashlight. The walls around them seemed to close in, but they had no choice. The creature wasn't the only danger in this world. There was something far worse waiting in the wastelands above. Ray led the way until they came to a junction. The air was thick with dust, and the faint light from their flashlights barely illuminated the path ahead. We have two choices, Ray said in a low voice, his eyes scanning the map he had pulled up again. One leads straight to the surface, past the ridge. The other ... it's a detour. Siren looked up at him. We take the detour. It might give us a better chance to avoid detection. Ray hesitated, then nodded. All right, we move fast. They pushed on, their steps silent against the worn metal floor. Every time a sound echoed in the tunnel, both of them tensed. Siren's mind raced. She couldn't help but wonder how long they could keep running. How long could Ray keep leading them? The shelters were all slowly falling apart, and there were no more safe places to hide. Her people were gone. The war was over, and the humans who remained, they didn't seem much better off. "Ray," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "do you ever think about the world before?" He didn't respond immediately. His pace slowed for a moment as he thought about her question. "Sometimes," he said quietly. "I remember what life was like before. I was young, just a kid, when the war broke out. My father used to talk about peace, about a future where things weren't always about survival." Siren frowned. "But that's all it is now, survival." Ray stopped in his tracks and turned toward her. "It doesn't have to be. We can still fight for something better." She met his gaze, her eyes searching his face for the truth. "But how?" Ray didn't answer immediately. His eyes softened for just a moment before he turned back to the path ahead. "I don't know, but we keep moving. We keep fighting." They continued down the detour, not speaking, but understanding the weight of their words. A few hours later, the tunnel began to open up. They were nearing the surface now, the faint light filtering in from above. The sound of the creature had disappeared, probably still trapped in the shelter, or too far behind to catch up. Ray motioned for her to be quiet as they approached the final stretch. They were almost free, but something in the air felt different. The tension in his body was palpable as they neared the exit. They would soon find out if they had made it out in time. The final stretch was before them. The end of the tunnel loomed ahead, where the last slivers of light fought to filter in from above. They had reached the surface, finally. Ray stepped forward, his movement slower now, his body weary from the long hours of travel. Siren followed just behind him, her eyes scanning every shadow. They both knew that this wasn't the end, not really. Even with the surface in sight, the world they knew was a wasteland, unforgiving and dangerous. Ray lifted a panel at the tunnel's end. He pushed it open, his muscles aching as he gripped the rusted edges. The air outside was thick, damp with the remnants of the storm they had passed through earlier. But there was something else, something almost familiar. The faint smell of earth, of survival. They emerged into the open air, stepping onto cracked soil and broken streets. Everything around them was a ruin, buildings half buried under sand and debris. Once proud cities were now just shadows of their former selves. It was hard to believe that this had once been a thriving place, full of life and hope. Ray took a deep breath, as if feeling the weight of the world on his shoulders. "We're not out of danger yet," he muttered, adjusting the strap on his pack. "The ridge is still a long way." Siren glanced over at him, her gaze thoughtful. She could feel his exhaustion, the same way she felt it in herself. Yet, despite everything, there was a glimmer of hope in his eyes. He hadn't given up yet. Neither had she. "What if we can't make it?" she asked softly, breaking the silence. Her voice trembled slightly, betraying the fear she had tried to hide. Ray paused. He looked at the sky, where the clouds were beginning to part, revealing the faintest sliver of sunlight. It was as if the universe was giving them one last chance. Then, "We keep fighting," he said quietly. "We survive." They walked for hours, staying close to the broken buildings, avoiding open fields where any movement could draw attention. The sun was setting as they approached the base of the ridge. The shadows grew longer, and the air grew colder. It wasn't just the temperature. The feeling of being hunted lingered like a shadow, and Siren couldn't shake the thought that they were being watched. Ray stopped suddenly. Siren almost bumped into him. She looked up at his face and saw the tension in his jaw. His eyes were narrowed, scanning the horizon. "What's wrong?" she whispered. Ray didn't answer immediately. He was listening. The faintest sound, footsteps, distant but unmistakable. They weren't alone anymore. "Get down," he hissed. They crouched behind the nearest wall, hearts racing. The sound of the footsteps grew louder, coming closer. Siren's breath quickened as she strained to listen. She couldn't see who or what was coming, but the danger was real and they didn't have much time. Ray motioned for her to stay quiet. He pulled out his weapon, checking it once more. Siren clenched her fists, her mind racing. She had never been this close to a human force, never this vulnerable. The footsteps stopped. Siren's heart pounded in her ears as she waited for the next move. They were so close now, she could hear the soft rustling of boots against the ground. Then, just as quickly as it had started, the sound stopped. The silence stretched on, long and unnerving. Ray slowly stood, motioning for Siren to follow. "We need to move. Now." They hurried through the shadows, moving faster, the sound of their steps covered by the wind. After several minutes, they reached the ridge, a high point from which they could see the ruins below. The landscape stretched out before them, vast and empty. And in the distance, beyond the devastation, they saw the silhouette of another shelter. It was farther than they had hoped, but it was their destination. Siren stopped for a moment, looking back at the path they had just traveled. The shelter, the creature, the fear, it all seemed so far away now. Yet, even with the new shelter in sight, she knew that the battle was far from over. "We can make it," Ray said, his voice full of quiet determination. Siren turned to him, her eyes filled with something he hadn't seen in a long time. "Trust." "Yes," she whispered. "We will." They walked down side by side toward the unknown. The world was still broken, still a mess of chaos and fear. But for the first time in a long time, Siren felt like there might be something worth fighting for. Maybe they didn't have the answers. Maybe they weren't sure of what came next. But they had each other, and they had the will to survive. And in this broken world, that was enough. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting the world in an eerie light. And as they walked toward the shelter, the wind carried the faintest whisper, a promise. Unspoken, but clear. There was still hope.